Hong Kong protesters, how is it going on the front lines? First rule of being frontline protester, you never identify yourself a frontline protester, even on the internet. This is serious advice for activists around the world, not just a reference to Fight Club. Please don't underestimate how far a government would go to keep their power, even if you live in a democratic country. And I don't mean Op is asking a bad question, I know this is a genuine question about the current situation of Hong Kong. I just want to remind those who have been on the front line, not to expose themselves while explaining the situation. Protests have largely stopped because of COVID-19. Some members of the pro-Beijing party are trying to push Article 23 amongst all the paranoia and attention focused on the pandemic. Aside from that, police resentment still lingers. The people haven't forgotten. There are still blatant incidents of police misconduct taking place against journalists. The double whammy of protests into the coronavirus has hit retailers and businesses especially hard. A drive to the hospital the other day has just rows of shops that have closed down or are close to closing down. I suspect things will pick up again after the epidemic dies down. We know that economic downturns are not good for civil obedience. Our country, from a social perspective, is fucked. Though things appear to have quieted down, it only looks that way because of the virus. The movement is still very much alive. Things like this have been circulating around, free educative material that protesters can read so that once we can safely, in terms of virus, go back out, then we have a more planned strategy that will help us push forward. Thank you for not forgetting about us. Frontline protester here, started going out in 2014, umbrella movement, and participated in most major battles since 612 of 2019. Since the Chinese New Year, protests aside from the 21st and 31st of every month to remember the 721 Triad attack and 831 police attacks have been smaller in scale. The most recent battle was to stop new public housing tower blocks from being used for coronavirus. It was always called Wuhan virus in Chinese, even pro-Beijing camp, containment, as they are located only 100 meters away from other occupied blocks. To force Carrie Lam to close up borders, there have also been attacks on the border and transit, which combined with the doctor and nurse strike has forced the closure of most borders with China mainland. The current battle is about shopping, dining and posting on the internet, which I will explain later. Large-scale demonstration, 100,000 marching peacefully from Victoria's Park to Government HQ, has stopped since the local elections. The historical victory for the pan-democrat and localist has given Carrie Lam and Beijing a message, forcing them to face the reality that their silent majority simply doesn't exist. About 60% of Hong Kongish are pro-democratic and under 20% of people still support the government. The police morale was low and they are afraid to admit their identity off-duty. The blue ribbon hardliners still attack young protesters when they put up Lennon Wall and such, usually with riot police stepping in later so they can escape and the police would arrest the wounded victims. The police have initially given a bit, only to get more violent and hateful than ever after the new police commissioner Chris Tang stepped up. He is a ruthless commander that cares nothing about image or moral. He supports the police for any criminal activity and denies any accusation, even when it is fully captured on TV. Due to a flaw in the system, the police and prosecutor gets to pick the judge for each case, which they always pick the most biased, pro-Beijing ones. Many protesters get the maximum sentence, and many innocents gets thrown in prison for months, only to see charge drop due to lack of evidence. Dozens of civil lawsuits are on the way. The police can get away with any crime, the police force simply refuses to identify the policeman responsible for each attack. When someone doxed him for a civil lawsuit, the police just arrests everyone who shares such information on social media. They are turning HK into a de facto police state. But what people really worry about is the surge of disappearance and suicide cases. A large number of bodies found are teenagers dressed in black clothing. Our volunteer scouts even noticed police vans offloading cops in the area hours ahead of body found. Kidnapping is also common. The police admits using unmarked cars and plain clothes to arrest protesters, just drive by, stop and grab. They won't notify anyone unless the victim's friend and family report it to the police, then he or she will be found in custody, usually beaten or sexually assaulted. The Hong Kong Public Cemetery has over 30 burials of unidentified bodies since the beginning of 2020, a large increase over last year. Some of us starting carrying a knife, I guess it gives some hope to avoid getting killed or framed for 10 years in jail. However, we are winning other battles. The yellow economy has grown significantly, making Carrie Lam in Beijing worried. Vowed to only support pro-democratic yellow businesses, the movement has moved from restaurants to supermarkets and then other businesses. Blue pro-Beijing businesses have historically dominated the market and suppressed yellow businesses, yet this is changing. As Wuhan virus is hitting hard, restaurants close down and most survivors are yellow ones with banners and slogans on the door. Last night I dined in Mongkok, 70% of restaurants left open are yellow. They measured body temperature and sterilized the hands of every customer before letting in, just like what the doctors suggested. A number of blue businesses have turned coat to join in. Pro-Beijing/Chinese corporations are quickly losing revenue from this 7 million people market, and the rich are putting pressure on Carrie Lam. As someone else has said, hardline pro-Beijing LegCo members are pushing the Article 23. This is however not supported by the rest of the pro-Beijing camp, which still hopes to get votes from moderates. The LegCo election is coming. It is not very powerful, and the way the system is set guarantees pro-Beijing members will always be the majority, but we will be gaining seats no matter what. The future is uncertain and people are getting beaten, charged or murdered, but the fighting spirit is still high and we won't quit until all 5 demands are met. Glory to Hong Kong. Hi, I'm a Hong Konger, but not one of our braves. We call the frontline protesters the braves. With COVID-19, it's become riskier and riskier to gather for protests or anything like that, so mainly large activities have subsided, except for some, e.g. the gathering to mark the Yuen Long attack a few days ago. Some smaller activities, which are equally important to the movement, such as Lenin Walls, Lunch with You, etc., are still ongoing. But I can really go into detail about the protests before COVID-19. There were moments when I was protesting that it got bloody and violent. It turns in the blink of an eye, really. Once I was at a memorial for deceased student Chow Tzu's Lok, and the moment the clock hit 9 p.m., the official curfew for large, unauthorized gatherings, apparently, there was police in riot gear surrounding the park we were in, asking anybody young and dressed in black for their IDs and basically arresting anybody that refused. It didn't get too dangerous that night because the memorial was still considered a religious gathering. But in other protests, such as the one that happened in Central, it can get bloody really quick. In the middle of the protests, at 5 p.m., rather than 9 p.m. as the police said, they suddenly disapproved of the march and ordered everybody to evacuate. This was impossible because Hong Kong is a tiny city and there were hundreds of thousands on the streets. So when we couldn't do it, they set up water cannons and fired tear gas. In another protest in Central, back in the occupation of Kuk, they fired tear gas 40 minutes after the protest began, right when people were beginning to join. It was pretty much impossible to avoid getting hit by the gas. Then they started grabbing people, mostly those dressed in black, and quite literally beat them up right in front of me. There have been so many times I've seen police abuse happen right in front of my eyes. I saw a teen dressed in black just walking near the vicinity of a protest and a police grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and slammed him against a wall. I saw a boy bleeding from the head after he got hit by a tear gas canister. I saw an old man that tried to shield a protester from the police get pushed onto the floor like he was nothing. I met with university students from HKU when they occupied it to bring them food, and it literally broke my heart when I saw the baton marks on their arms and wrists and the bruises on their faces. And they told me I was too young to be there and told me to leave. These people are kind people. It hurts me so bad to know that they are risking their lives like this. I implore everybody to not forget about Hong Kong. Hong Konger here, but not frontline protester. Public gatherings have most subsided as most organizers don't want to risk further contagion. There are still people who come out and block the roads on monthly anniversaries of 721, 831 and the death of the college student protester. I think that's 1113. The prosecution from the government hasn't stopped. Just yesterday a councilwoman was arrested with some charge that was not used since 1967. RTHK, which produces documentaries and satire shows, are under attack from the pro-Beijing camps. The police beat suspects until they are too injured to attend their court hearings. But on some fronts, the fight is still continuing. Volunteers still put up poster art on walls even though the risks of just doing that has been greater and greater. There are people planning the strategy to LegCo, Legislative Council, election that will take place near the end of 2020. You see pictures of masked protesters holding the Free HK, Revolution now flag around Hong Kong to remind people not to forget about the cause and the people who made sacrifices for it. Groups are still trying to get other countries to pass legislation to support our fight for freedom and autonomy. Some individuals are trying to sue the police in a civil suit. Also, some pro-Beijing LegCo members are pushing to pass Article 23, a national security law that will effectively end freedom of speech and assembly. There has been a lot of talk about pushing this back, so I guess we will see. I feel like everyone are realizing, even though the pitch battles with fire and bricks are what draw the headlines, but we are in for a long fight. Preserving our culture, our language, and our values, in the long run, is as important as anything else. I know the odds are stacked against us and all anyone can talk about is how powerful the CCP is, but we are not giving up yet. Throwaway, obviously. Not what you would call a hardcore frontline, but have been to various protests and inhaled tear gas. TBH, even before the virus broke out, the amount of people going out to protest has dwindled as time goes on, with a few special occasions seeing a sudden influx of people going on peaceful walks and rallies. At least that's the nature of the event. Obviously the Gov and Popo disagree, when something outrageous happens. But on the front lines though, most people are very supportive and friendly of each other, and you'll basically get all the help you need should you just speak up. I don't know if international media reported much on the two incidents where the police basically blocked in two universities, fired a crazy amount of tear gas and arrested a lot of protesters, but after that, a major issue that kinda popped up was that with a lot of more experienced frontline protesters arrested or under bail, the less experienced had to step up. What happened was that in the following protests, people were definitely less organized and aware of what to do. Many times we've seen people just provoking the police and not running away in time, or just occupying a spot until a lot of people just get arrested. After the breakout of the Wuhan virus, there have been a lot fewer protests, but similar events still garner a lot of attention from protesters, and a lot of us show up to these events, such as monthly gatherings on the 31st to Prince Edward Station due to the incident, where police basically entered the station and a train and used a lot of unnecessary force on citizens last August 31st, or holding vigils for those who have fallen from the protests. Psychologically though, I think all protesters, frontline or not, are mentally exhausted. Our government manages to go lower with each policy they make, and police brutality just gets worse every day while their power remains unchecked. I'd go as far as to say that we are really desperate, but we're still not giving in. Also from Hong Kong, but not really frontline. First, we really appreciate you caring enough to ask. We always strive to get as much international attention as possible. There hasn't been much large-scale protests because of the virus. Most people are staying at home. However, police brutality hasn't stopped. On Mar 8, police went to many people's homes and arrested them, possibly related to the Palais siege. Some people reported hearing screams of "help me" that night. The same night, there was a memorial held for Chow Tzu's Lok, and police again treated participants with unnecessary violence and sprayed pepper spray at reporters. Similar things happen on Mar 21 when people gathered to protest what happened on July 21 last year. Chinese soldiers dressed as Hong Kong police have been ramping up their attacks. Many suicides have been reported, but we all know those were all murders. Hong Kong needs some help fast. Winnie just kicked out all foreign reporters. Hopefully Tiananmen Square 2.0 doesn't happen soon. Chinese mainlanders studying in and standing with Hong Kong here. I have never really been a frontline protester, but I have witnessed what frontline is like quite a few times. Especially when the police stormed our campus, CUHK, and fired over 2,000 tear gas bombs to the frontline protesters resisting police violence with petrol bombs and bricks. Feel free to ask if you have any questions. Have a lot of stories to share with if you are interested. Not a protester and definitely not that yellow either, but I am a Hong Konger. There are not a lot of protests now, but the few that I have seen are because the gov is shit. Info as to exactly how shit. Those in quarantine are to wear a wristband. This wristband can be taken off easily and by one hand. Quarantined people can then walk around the streets and go totally unnoticed, possibly infecting a ton of people. The wristband has a QR code on it to enter a website, which takes forever to load, and often doesn't load anyways. The government has made excuses for a mainland elderly couple who were supposed to be in quarantine and ventured outside, asking for understanding and sympathy, although they were wanted people. The government has not enacted any measures to keep those in quarantine inside, only visiting and providing information on what to do and what not to do. Hong Kong already knows its people are selfish, so I don't know why they're not doing anything stricter. Tourists have been banned only recently. Borders to China were only closed after medical workers refused to go to work. Carrie Lam, the CEO, has put a ban on alcohol, her reasons being that people under the influence are more likely to interact with each other. She mentioned nothing on closing bars. She has also encouraged Hong Kong to not wear masks unless they feel sick, which means by the time they are wearing masks it will be too late anyway. The government promised to distribute masks to the public but ultimately didn't manage to produce any. Hong Kong exams are postponed and not cancelled, even though IB, A-levels, and IGCSE are cancelled for us. A plan is being made to name a park over a protester whose body was found in the sea, unknown if it's suicide or the police killed her. People have been saying that this was just a move by the Gov to appear good, and cash in on her death. Frontline first aider here. Large protests have paused because of the coronavirus outbreak, but smaller scale protests such as the anniversaries of the 7.21 and 8.31 attacks are still protested against every month. Efforts now have been focusing on preparing ourselves physically, mentally, and getting enough resources for protests against Article 23 being pushed in our legislative system. Here's an excerpt from Wikipedia. It states that the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall enact laws on its own to prohibit any act of treason, secession, sedition, subversion against the Central People's Government, or theft of state secrets, to prohibit foreign political organizations or bodies from conducting political activities in the region, and to prohibit political organizations or bodies of the region from establishing ties with foreign political organizations or bodies. Everyone here is expecting a round 2 for Hong Kong once the outbreak is over and our government tries to push it again. And everyone knows it's going to be violent since the implications are much higher, and both sides are probably going to have an upgrade in terms of firepower. Us medics have to similarly upgrade our gear in anticipation of the violence. Stay strong. The Chinese government is tyrannical monsters who need to be overthrown. I know the goal for them is to not overthrow the Chinese government, but if they were taken out we wouldn't have this problem in Hong Kong. Thank you for watching Reddit Space. Please subscribe if you love these Reddit stories.